You canceled plans last weekend, and the moment you did, something happened that you weren't expecting. You didn't feel guilty. You felt relief. Deep, quiet, immediate relief, like someone had finally taken a weight off your chest that you'd been carrying so long you forgot it was even there. And then maybe 2 minutes later, the guilt arrived anyway. Not because you hurt anyone, but because you enjoyed it too much, because it felt too good to just not go. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice whispered, "What does that say about me?" I want to answer that question today, fully and honestly, because that moment, that exhale when the plans fall apart, is not what you think it is. It is not laziness, it is not selfishness, it is not a sign that something in you is broken. It is your inner self telling you something true. And the real tragedy isn't that you felt that relief. The real tragedy is how many years you've spent apologizing for it. Let me tell you about someone. Her name is Maya. Maya is in her late 20s. She works in marketing. She's smart, warm, funny in that quiet, understated way that people only notice if they're paying attention. She has friends she genuinely loves. She is not depressed. She is not shy. She is not damaged. But every time a group trip gets planned, the kind where 5 people share an Airbnb and spend 4 days laughing and staying up late and being relentlessly together, Maya feels something begin to tighten in her chest about a week before. She goes every time. Of course she does. Not going feels like a confession, like admitting something about herself she isn't ready to say out loud. So she goes, she laughs, she takes the photos, she plays the role, and she comes back, depleted in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. She can sleep 12 hours and still feel like she's underwater. It takes her days to feel like herself again, and for years, she assumed she was just not social enough. Like there was a more extroverted version of herself she hadn't unlocked yet. A gap between who she was and who she was supposed to become. It never once occurred to Maya that she wasn't behind, that she wasn't broken, that she might simply be wired differently, and that wiring wasn't a flaw to fix. It was just her. Here's what nobody told Maya, and what nobody told you either. There is a psychologist named Elaine Aron who spent years studying people who experience the world more deeply than others. Not more dramatically, not more emotionally, more deeply. The distinction matters enormously. Her research found that roughly 15 to 20% of people have nervous systems that process sensory and emotional information at a fundamentally different level. Their brains run more processes per interaction. They notice more, they absorb more, they feel the weight of a room in a way other people simply don't. These are not fragile people. They are not broken people. They are people whose minds are doing significantly more work than the average person's during the exact same social experience. Think about what that means. Imagine 2 people sitting at the same dinner party for 3 hours. One of them walks away, mildly tired. The other walks away needing to sleep for a day and spend 2 more in silence before they feel like themselves again. From the outside, they had the same experience. On the inside, they were at completely different altitudes. And yet, we only have compassion for the first person's recovery. The second person, the one who needs more, gets called antisocial, introverted as an insult. Difficult to make plans with, someone who needs to get out more. And here's the cruelest part. That second person usually agrees. They've been agreeing their whole life. Pause for a moment. I want you to sit with something. How many years have you spent feeling like you were too much of one thing and not enough of another? Too quiet, too in your head, too fond of your own company. How much of your life have you performed a version of yourself that was slightly louder, slightly more available, slightly more present than you actually had the energy to be? Because there's a word for that. It's called masking. And it doesn't just cost you energy in the moment. Over time, it costs you something much more important. It costs you the thread back to what you actually want. You go to the parties, you fill the silences, you answer the calls even when your whole body is asking for quiet. You keep showing up to things you didn't choose because not showing up feels like a verdict on your character. And all of that, compounded across months and years, creates this low, persistent exhaustion that people usually blame on work, on stress, on being busy. It never occurs to them to ask the question Maya eventually asked herself. What if I've just been living slightly outside of myself for a very long time? Here is where the science gets quietly radical. A psychologist named Larson spent years studying what actually happens to people when they spend time alone by choice. Not forced isolation, not loneliness, chosen solitude. And what he found challenges almost everything our culture quietly insists is true. People who voluntarily spent time alone came back to their social lives in better shape, more emotionally regulated, more capable of genuine connection, more present, not less connected, but better at connection when they returned to it. The key word, and Larson was careful about this, was chosen. Forced isolation is destructive. Everyone agrees on that. What breaks people is not being alone, it's having no choice about it. What restores people, certain people, is the deliberate decision to step back and be with themselves. And we have somehow, as a culture, collapsed that distinction entirely. We see someone sitting alone at a restaurant and we feel sad for them. We see someone decline an invitation and we assume rejection or depression. We have built a social script so deeply into the walls of our shared life that presence equals wellness and absence equals lack. And some people have internalized that script so completely that they've spent decades performing extroversion just to avoid the conversation that comes with not performing it. What does that do to a person over a lifetime? Let me tell you what solitude actually is when you stop treating it like a symptom. When you are genuinely alone, not numbing yourself, not scrolling, not filling the quiet with noise. Something shifts. The thoughts you were too busy to have during the week finally arrive. The emotions you moved past too quickly because there was always somewhere to be finally get felt. The intuitions that get crowded out by other people's opinions finally get heard. Your inner life is where your actual values live, where you figure out what you think before the room tells you what to think. People who are genuinely comfortable alone tend to have a much clearer sense of their own convictions. They feel more capable of disagreement, not because they're contrarian, but because they've already had the conversation with themselves. They've interrogated their own positions in the quiet. They know what they actually believe. That is a kind of cognitive independence that is becoming genuinely rare in a world that has engineered entire platforms specifically designed to make stillness feel unbearable, to make the quiet feel like something that needs to be filled immediately. Choosing to sit alone with your own thoughts undistracted is maybe one of the most quietly rebellious things a person can do. But here is the part I promise to be honest about. Solitude can also become a hiding place. There is a version of this that looks like restoration, but is actually retreat, where someone isn't recharging, they're disappearing. And only the person inside that experience really knows which one it is. Because they feel different from the inside. Recharging feels like coming back to yourself. There's a quality of fullness to it. You go in depleted and you come out quieter, but clearer, more solid. Retreating feels like relief at first, and that's the trap. But the relief slowly flattens into something emptier, a numbness, a mild disconnection from everything. You come out of a weekend alone and you feel vaguely worse, not better, heavier somehow, not lighter. If you recognize that second feeling, that's not a judgment, it's information. It's your nervous system telling you something different. Not that you need to be more social, necessarily, but that the solitude isn't doing what you need it to do. That maybe what you're protecting yourself from is something worth walking toward instead. The people who seem to navigate this best are the ones who don't turn solitude into an identity. They're not loners, they're not proud of their distance, they're not wearing their preference for quiet as a badge. They're just tending to something the way you'd water a plant. They go inward, they come back, they're more present for having been away. Here is the moment I want you to stay with. Maya figured all of this out at 31. Not through therapy, not through a book, through a single weekend where her plans fell through and she just didn't refill them. She didn't immediately text someone else. She didn't turn on a show just to have noise. She let the weekend be empty. She cooked something slow. She read. She sat with her own thoughts long enough to actually hear them, and she described it afterward in a way I keep coming back to. She said it was the first time in years she felt like she was living in her own life, rather than acting it out. Living in her own life rather than acting it out. How long has it been since you felt that? How long has it been since you weren't performing, even subtly, even just for yourself? How long since the version of you that exists in the quiet got to just exist? So here is what I want to leave you with. Not a diagnosis, not a permission slip. Just this. That relief you feel when the plans fall through, that exhale, is not laziness. It is not a character flaw. It is not something to be ashamed of or analyzed into a problem. It is your nervous system and your psychology and your particular way of being in the world telling you something real about what you need. And the only mistake, the one that actually costs you, is spending so long defending that need or hiding it or apologizing for it that you never actually honor it. You don't have to become a hermit. You don't have to stop showing up for people. You don't have to choose between connection and solitude like they're opposites, because they're not. The people who are best at loving others are often the ones who know how to come home to themselves first. Let yourself be someone who needs quiet. Let yourself be someone who thinks better alone. Let yourself be someone who cancels sometimes, not out of fear, not out of avoidance, but out of knowing what your mind needs to do its best work and your heart needs to stay intact. That's not antisocial. That's not cold. That's not a wound dressed up as a preference. That is just you, finally listening to yourself. And maybe that's been the whole point all along.